Okay, so time to sew up the Butterick 6018. So let's get to it. So first things first, let's make those adjustments from the toile to the paper pattern pieces, and then we can get some fabric cut out. Okay, pattern adjustment time. Let's start with the bodice, because why not? So I'm going to be using the changes that I made on my toile to match up with the pattern piece to work out what I need to shift. So first thing I'm going to do is the arm side, and then I'll check that the dart is correct. And I did move it a little bit, so I'm going to need to do a little bit of finagling there. I widened it and shortened it. Not quite sure how the sellotape's going to cope with that, but there we go. And then I need to check the large dot as well against where I stopped sewing. The dart and the large dot, that's a simple enough thing to do, but the arm side, I wanted to show you how I'm going to go about doing that, because it's a little bit more involved than the rest of the adjustments for this pattern. So, starting with the sleeve that we put the patch in, so that's this sleeve. So we need to work out how much we need to lift the armpit up first of all, so the underarm of the arm side. And as we can see, we've got a stitch line there at 5/8 of an inch in from the edge of the bodice fabric, and I've got a little patch underneath. So it's not much more than that up to the stitch line there. So we need to make sure we've got a seam allowance on the other side. So I'm going to measure from this stitch line to that stitch line, and then measure against the pattern piece at where the stitch line would be to mark in where I want the bottom of the arm side. I'm going to do the same effectively at the shoulder seam, marking half where my stitch line actually ended up being on this sleeve, because that's the one that's positioned more or less where I want it to be. I'm going to use those reference points to join up the arm side. So get on with that, and I'll show you where we're at when things are a little bit more in place. Okay, so this dotted line here is the original stitch line. The solid line is the new stitch line, not the cutting line. So I've measured the seam allowances in the actual sewn version of the toile and used them to mark this in place. I'm now going to mark my cutting line in a different colour using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're going to mark it 5/8 of an inch away. Okay, so purple line is the new cut line. So I'm just going to stick down this edge. So I've obviously stuck the paper on behind. So I'll stick down this edge and trim off the excess. And the exact same thing, same process is going to be applied to the back bodice piece, so that my whole arm side actually works as a thing that goes around the whole of the arm and not just the front. So yeah, so that's adjusting the arm side. If you've adjusted the arm side, you also need to adjust the sleeve, so we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so adjustments have been made to the front and back bodice. So then the arm side on both, and I've adjusted the dart on the front bodice to make it wider. I also checked the point to sew to on the facing for the lapels to come down. Now, I had mistakenly sewn to this notch point in the toile. I should have sewn to there, which is the large dot. Where I unpicked it to is the cross. So what I'm going to do is sew it to the large dot, try it on, see if I like it. If it's too low, I'll sew it up to the cross. So I'm going to mark both of those points with tailor's tacks when I come to sew up the final bodice. Okay, so that's the bodice pieces done. Now to adjust the sleeve to make sure that it matches the arm side. Okay, so I've stuck the sleeve pattern piece onto more paper. So I put little bits on either side, because when I sewed it on the better fitting sleeve, I sewed it at 3/8 of an inch rather than 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to add 2/8 of an inch back on to the sleeve. And then I've stuck a bit behind the sleeve head because that's going to change shape with one of the next steps. So first things first, let's add in the extra 2/8 of an inch back into the seam allowance on the sides, and then we'll talk about the sleeve head. Okay, so I've marked in the new seam allowance on the sides. So I'll trim that down and stick down the flaps later. So now we need to raise this portion because we raised the arm side. So we're going to raise this twice as much as the arm side. So it's a simple measure, mark and put in, and then you'll see what it's done to the sleeve cap once I've got that in place. Okay, so I've marked in the raise in the bottom of the arm side. You can see it's coming in a lot higher on the curves. It's making this part a lot smaller. So what I need to do is actually make sure that that's going to still fit in the arm side. So I'm going to do that by taking my arm side stitch line and warping it around about 5/8 of an inch inside of where it wants to meet and getting it as close as I can to the two. So there's going to be a lot of rustling here. So that's there, pivoting the paper around to keep the 5/8 of an inch where it needs to be. Now this should be a little short of the centre because we have a bit of ease to go in, and yes it is. So that's probably about right. So I'm going to just smooth out this little bit here and trim off the excess, and that's my sleeve good to go. So that's the more involved changes on the pattern made for the bodice pieces. The skirt's much more straightforward adjustments. I just need to measure how much I've taken various seams in and mark them on the pattern pieces and blend them in and cut them out. So that's very straightforward. So nothing I haven't shown you before. So yeah, so once I get those done, we'll get to cutting out the final fabric. Hopefully I've got all my adjustments right. So adjustments are made and the fabric is cut out. I'm using a cotton from Rose & Hubble. I believe it's a cotton poplin. They've called it fern, the print on the main fabric, but to me it looks more like feathers, and you'll see what I mean once I get sewing. It's all pinned to paper at the moment. So let's get cracking with the bodice. So the first thing I'm going to do, as per usual, is I'm going to mark up the fabric. Did think about doing some tailor tacks on some of the large dots, and I may still do that. But I'm also going to use some chalk. I've put a yellow in because my fabric is navy as its background colour. And I've cut out the facings in the plain navy and the rest of the dress in the print navy. I was a little bit dubious as to whether I would get all of the pieces for the skirt and the bodice out of the print fabric. I ended up having to cut the bodice on the cross grain to do it, but it's done. And so essentially, instead of the grain going top to bottom, it's going right to left, which shouldn't affect stability too much. And the print is non-directional, so that's fine. I could have cut the bodice out of the plain navy and done the facings in the print, but I decided to stick with my original plan, which was to do contrast facings and cuffs. I could probably have managed to get the facings and the cuffs out of what I had left. It would have been a squeeze, but I think I could have done it. So I had 3 meters of the print and 1 meter of the navy. And the total requirement, I believe, was 3.5. Yeah, 3.5. So, pretty close. So, yeah, so I do have some plain navy left, but that's going to be really useful for pocket bags, facings, that kind of stuff. And I do have a bit of the print left as well, which again, useful for pocket bags and facings and things, but also good for English paper piecing scrap projects. So, let's get to marking up. facing, the sleeve. I'm going to notch the sleeve first. So that's essentially, I mean, they've got some dots on here, but I'm using notches instead of dots because it works for my brain. So snip that in. I'll do all the bodice pieces first, and then when I get to sewing the skirt up, I'll do the notches on that as well. Okay, so that's all the notches on the sleeve. I'm going to take a couple of the pins out so I can show you this print. So you'll see what I mean when I say that it reads more feathers to me, whereas obviously the company called it ferns. That's enough for me to open it up. So yeah, so that's the print. So that'll be the bodice, the sleeves and the skirt of the dress, and then just a plain navy cuff, plain navy on the inside of the lapels. It's the facing that's going to be on the shirt, that's going to be showing on the exterior once it's all sewn up. So yeah, it's a very non-directional print. It breaks up the navy quite nicely, so it's not all sort of block colour. It's going to be very definitely a date night dress rather than a everyday wear dress, but it's fine. So I'm essentially using a pen to mark what I'm doing. You probably can't see much with that angle. Let's lower you down a bit. Okay, so I've stuck a pin through where the dot is, and I'm lifting the fabric and the paper as needed to mark where the dot is. And I'm going to do this one piece at a time so that I get the darts put in before I sort of forget which dot's which. I tend to leave the paper on my pieces until I'm ready to sew them. That way things don't shift before I'm marking them, and I've got a label on each of my pieces as to which one's which, I find useful. I'm quite lucky doing this, that my ironing board underneath the cover is it's not solid, so it's like a diamond pattern. So I've got lots of places where I can just shove a pin straight through and have it flush with the pattern or the fabric, which makes doing this kind of thing a lot easier. Okay, so that's the back marked up. Oh, sorry, that's the front marked up. So that's ready to go. As I say, I'll go through piece by piece, mark them up, leave them attached to their paper until I'm ready to sew. Yeah. Now, the pattern instructions have you interface the facings first and the cuffs first. I haven't done that. So I will do it. I'm just going to wait until I'm ready to actually use them to do it, just because why not? Okay, so the darts are sewn in on the first side of the front bodice. Now, as you can see, I didn't quite get my dart lined up perfectly on the paper pattern here. I think I must have folded it the wrong way when I was checking it. But that's okay, because this is in the seam allowance, so I can fudge it a little bit to ease that in, so it's not going to show. And actually in this print, the darts are almost entirely disappearing into the print, which is good, because if I don't perfectly line up the seams between the underbust dart and the back darts and the skirt, it's going to be fine. The print's going to cover it. I mean, obviously I'm aiming to get them perfectly matched up, but if they're like a millimetre out, it's not going to be too much of an issue. Okay, so I need to press the other bust dart using my trusty tailor's ham. It's doing really well on the bust dart, not so easy on the underbust dart. I think that's because it's so short and steep. It's taking in quite a bit of fabric there now. So there's a little bit less of a smooth ending to that dart, but given that it's a 50s dress, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm not going to be getting the full 50s silhouette. I don't have a 50s bra underneath. I don't have a 50s petticoat underneath. But it's going to have that nod to the 50s in the shape of the bust on this dress, which is... I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so when I'm pinning my darts in, because I've marked the legs in chalk, I'm actually using a pin to make sure that I'm pinning the legs to the legs. So I'm putting it through one chalk line and making sure it comes out the other side on the chalk line. Then I lay it along the chalk line, pop it back through, and again make sure it comes out along a chalk line. I'll put a couple of those in, and I'll put one in at the point as well. Make sure you've got them pointing, the pins pointing away from the point of the dart, because that's the direction you're going to sew in. It's a lot easier to remove the pins if the head of the pin is towards you as you're sewing. Now, my third pin I'm going to put in is just at the point. That serves two purposes. One, it just makes sure that the crease of the dart goes all the way to the point and holds it in place as you're sewing, but it also is a visual reminder for me of where I need to be stitching off the edge of the fabric for the dart, because you don't finish at the point, you don't do forward and back stitching at the point of the dart, because you'll get a weird bobbly thing happening. So you stitch right the way off, knot it and trim the thread. So yeah, darts. Okay, so there's the tail end from my dart coming off the point. So we're going to put a knot in it, and I'm going to actually use a pin to help me. So a pin is effectively going to be my third hand. I'm going to stick my pin through the loop and anchor it into the fabric. I'm going to pull my thread tight against the pin and then remove the pin. This just helps me get the knot a little bit closer to the end of the dart. And I can trim off the thread close to the knot. There we go. Dart done, ready for pressing. Okay, so my bodice is all sewn together. You get a good sort of sense of how the contrast is going to work, because with it being a printed fabric, the wrong side is navy. So there are a couple of points on the shoulder seams where I've got some puckers, but because the lapels are going to sit open, kind of like that, you're not really going to notice the puckers on the shoulder seams very much. The feature is the contrast lapel, and actually the puckers are pretty close to where that's going to sit. So that is the bodice done, bar the facing. I've left the left seam open. In the instructions it has you close up the top of the seam, and then when you come to do the skirt you close up the bottom of the seam, and then you insert the zip. But I wasn't very happy with the vintage method of zip insertion in the pattern, partly because I'm using invisible zips, which is not really the sort of zip that they would have been writing patterns for in 1952. So I'm going to do my zip a little bit differently. I'm going to insert it like I normally would insert an invisible zip, and then close the seam up afterwards. So we French seamed below the zip, and if I can find my navy blue bias tape, I'll hung finish the zip and up to the arm side. But it's now lunchtime, so I'm going to go and have some lunch and feed the cat, and then I'll come back and do my facings and the skirt after lunch. Okay, so I've got the facing all sewn up, and the instructions just say to finish the edges. Doesn't tell you how. It's talking about the curved edges, the outside edge, so this side edge here. I'm just going to hem it.
When you get down to this corner coming up now, you don't need to break so much. You just let the just slightly glide round it. I mean, I don't even really touch the break on that last corner. See, the downforce is good. Yeah, but you don't. If you get, you know, when you break some places like Monaco and stuff like that, because Monaco is quite technical and quite narrow, isn't it? Yeah, but there's not a lot of long like straights, is there? Quite a technical course. There's a lot of turning. So increased downforce on Monaco would be a bad option. I might give it a go at some point, increased downforce, just to see. Because if it works on it, yes, but if it works on increased downforce,
so here we have one complete facing, which is hemmed. I could have got the serger out and serged the edges. I could have done zigzag stitching. I could have done an overcast stitch. I could have bias bound the edges as well. But I think this gives a nice clean, minimal bulk finish. I don't think serging necessarily looks the best on woven garments. It's on the inside anyway, but I'm going to be looking at it when I put the dress on, so it's nice to have it clean. So, next step is get the facing in the bodice. So I'm just tacking down the facing to the seams. Now, this should hold the facing in place when you're wearing the garment. Some people will prefer to do a full lining though. Facings do have a tendency to try and sort of roll out without understitching. I haven't understitched this one because, well, the facings are meant to be on display. But, by tucking down the edges, it'll help hold them in place and should minimise the amount of, sort of tucking in of the edges of the facing throughout the day. That's the thing that sometimes annoys me, is the facings popping out the neckline. But, if it does annoy me, I can always go around and tack it down in a few other places. Just being careful to not get stitches coming through onto the outside of the garment. So I'm just putting a few stitches through the seam allowance, that French seam that I've put in place, and the hem that's on the facing. So one point at each shoulder and one at the centre front. And like I say, I can always come back and add more if I need to at a later date. I have already pressed the facing to the inside, so that will help too. Okay, so I'm French seaming together the skirt panels. I'm going to leave the left hand side open again, just like I did on the bodice, which is on the mannequin there. I've not set the sleeves in yet because I haven't closed up the left hand seam. So what I'm going to do is French seam the skirt together, then I'm going to attach the skirt to the bodice, insert the zip, and then close up the rest of the left seam. At that point I'll be able to set in the sleeves, check the changes that I've made work the way I think they're going to work. A bit later if they don't. And work out how I'm going to finish the seams for the sleeves, because it's a bit trickier to French seam them because it's in the round. I might just bias tape them like I'm going to do for the zip edges, but we'll see. So I'm working on the front of the skirt at the moment. I've marked my centre front and my left front, right front, just like I did with the toile. And I'll do the same when I get to the back pieces as well, so I know I've got them the right way around. So I'm just going to carry on doing that and come back to you once I'm ready to sort of attach things together. But yeah, we're really getting there with this dress. Okay, so the bodice and the skirt are attached, but I've got this weird pleaty thing happening on this dart, so I've clearly caught something in the wrong place there. So some unpicking is going to be in my very near future, but I need to go and make dinner now, so that's for a little bit later on. Okay, so the underbust seam much improved. Not perfect, but much improved. So time to put the zip in, and then we'll be ready for some sleeves. Okay, so invisible zipper is in. I'm much happier with how that goes in than the vintage style one that the pattern called for. No visible stitching on the outside, and I'm just more comfortable with putting in an invisible zip anyway. So now I'm going to French seam up the rest of the side seam and detangle it from some yarn. And then it'll be the sleeves. So we're nearly there. Okay, so it's together. I haven't quite got the adjustment on the arm side right, because it's pulling a bit when I do that. And it's a little bit of restriction on range of motion, but it's not terrible. And for the purposes of what I'll be wearing it for, I'm not going to worry about it right now. What I am going to do though is finish the seams where I've set the sleeves in, and hem it, then a bit of hand finishing. Okay, so I know I'm cutting my head off a bit here, but I wanted to give you a full view of the dress. So here it is. Nice full skirt, but not so full as I feel overwhelmed by it. So there's the back view. There's the front. So overall, it's fine. I like the fit through here. I like the length. I did have to take off quite a lot of the hem to level it up. So it's a bit shorter than I thought it was going to be, but it's more in line with my other dresses. I've also learned that I really don't know how to use a blind hem foot. So that's going to take some practice. It's fine. It looks neat, it's nice and consistent. It's just not the finish I was going for. But that's okay. It gets swallowed up in the print of this dress. So although it looks like it's got a band sewn on the bottom, from a distance it doesn't really show. So yeah, so overall I'm pretty happy. As I say, nice fit through the midriff, is not too tight. There's a bit of ease in the back for movement, which is great. I am a bit annoyed at myself though when it comes to the sleeves. So I've got range of movement to, well, it's starting to creep up there. And the underarm is fine. The underarm is in exactly the right place, so I can't fix it with a gusset. The reason I'm losing ease, losing range of motion, because I didn't bring the arm sight in anywhere near enough at the front here, and I don't have enough fabric to recut the sleeves. I should have recut them when I did the toile and tried it out and worked it out there. Instead I've got this pulling across the front because the arm sight is just too far out. So yes, I should have brought it in quite a bit, and I didn't. No, I didn't reshape the arm, the cap of the sleeve as much as I would have done had I made that change. So I don't have enough fabric across the top of the shoulder, across the top of the arm to fudge it either. But for the purposes that I'll be wearing this dress, it's not like an everyday dress for me. In the 40s, 50s it probably would have been. But for me, it's more of a going out for a meal, going to a nice occasion, like family occasion type dress. So not like super formal, but also not super casual. Christmas Day, if you will, Easter dinner, those kinds of events. So yeah, for those purposes, it's fine. I've got enough range of motion for what I would be doing at those events. But I am obviously going to make a note of it when I finally get around to updating my sewing scrapbook, so that should I make it again, I make that adjustment. I think also, should I make it again, I would consider fully lining the bodice. Not that the French seams haven't worked, they have, they're great. And yeah, the facing is fine so far, but I am a little concerned that it might flip out at the back. So I'd either fully line it or make that back facing a bit longer, maybe. Stitch it down a bit more. There's options, but that doesn't really affect the fit. That's more of a finish thing. I have just serged the sleeve seam so that if I do get more of this fabric and I want to make that change to the sleeves, I can, because that'll be a lot easier to unpick. Mind you, if I'm changing the arm side that much, this part of it will just get cut off. But yeah, so I've got options there to redo the sleeves if I want to. I can just take the cuffs off and reapply them to the new sleeves. And I probably won't get round to it, but yeah, the option is there if I need to. So yeah, all in all, really happy, but there are changes that I would make were I to do it again. So yeah, that's my overall feeling on this dress. Okay, so if you've enjoyed spending time in my company, you might also enjoy this video here, and I will see you next time.